My name is Lucas Harper, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had a handle on my life. Married for 8 years, working the same steady job, living in the same brick house with the creaky porch and the lawn that always grew just a little too fast for me to keep up. If someone had asked me to describe my marriage, I probably would have used words like comfortable, solid, or safe. Maybe that's why I missed the first warning signs. I'd always been the type to stick to routines, up at 6, coffee at 6:15, out the door by 7. Savannah, my wife, worked from home and liked to sleep in. Our rhythms rarely collided except on weekends or the rare night when she'd surprise me with something special, a new recipe she wanted to try, or a bottle of wine she'd picked up on a whim. It's funny, the things you get used to, the small rituals that become invisible. You don't realize how much you rely on them until something shifts. It was a Thursday in late spring and I came home earlier than I'd planned. My boss had let us go after a long, pointless meeting, and I figured, why not? Maybe I'd beat Savannah to the dinner punch for once, maybe I'd make her laugh with some dumb story about traffic. But the second I walked in the front door, I knew something was off. The hallway was filled with the scent of her favorite perfume. Not just a faint trace, but a fresh, almost overwhelming cloud of it, floral and sweet, expensive stuff I'd bought her last Christmas. I paused, blinking. Savannah usually saved that perfume for special occasions, weddings, anniversaries, date nights we'd spent weeks planning. It was never part of her usual weekday routine. My shoes scuffed on the tile as I made my way through the foyer. From the kitchen, I heard laughter, Savannah's, unmistakable and bright, mixed with a man's deeper chuckle and the clatter of dishes. For a second, I thought she might have invited her sister over with her new boyfriend, or maybe her mom and one of her friends. But then I heard Peter's voice and my stomach dropped. Peter was our neighbor from 2 doors down. Nice enough guy, I guess. He'd helped me replace a section of fence last fall, borrowed my hedge trimmer a few times. We'd had beers in the backyard once or twice, never anything deep, just neighborly stuff. I'd never thought of him as anything more than a peripheral character in my life, the sort of person you nod to while mowing the lawn. When I stepped into the kitchen, the scene was almost surreal. The table was set for 2, not 3 or 4. Candles burned low in the center, giving the whole room a soft, golden glow. 2 glasses of red wine sat half full beside plates of appetizers, little toasts with smoked salmon, olives, and cheese, the sort of thing Savannah usually made when she wanted to impress someone. I spotted a linen napkin folded with a sprig of rosemary, something she'd learned from a YouTube video a few months back, but had never bothered with for just me. And then there was Savannah. She was standing by the stove in a new dress, something deep green that caught the light, hugging her in a way I'd never seen before. Her hair was done up, makeup perfect, and for a second I wondered if I'd gotten the date wrong. Was it our anniversary? Had I forgotten something important? Peter sat at the table, looking just as surprised as I felt. He stood quickly, a nervous smile on his face. Hey, Lucas. Didn't expect you home so early, man. Savannah turned, nearly dropping the spoon in her hand. Lucas, she said, her voice just a little too loud, too cheerful. I thought you were working late tonight. I was, but the meeting ended early, I replied, trying to keep my tone light as if nothing about this was strange at all. Figured I'd come home and see what you were up to. She glanced at Peter, then back at me. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for the 3 of us to realize how weird this all was. Oh, she said, a little flustered. It's just a friendly dinner. Peter was helping me with the website updates for work. Remember, I told you my boss wanted a redesign? He's got all this experience with graphic stuff, so I invited him over. I wanted to thank him for all the help. You don't mind, do you? She tried to say it casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her smile was too tight at the corners, and I noticed her hands fidgeting with the edge of her dress. Peter looked down at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. I forced myself to nod, but inside I felt a cold, sinking feeling I couldn't name. Nah, I don't mind, I said, though I knew I sounded distant. Just caught me by surprise, is all. Savannah laughed too quickly. Yeah, I should have texted you. Sorry. You want to join us? There's plenty of food. I glanced at the table, 2 plates, not 3. No extra chair pulled out. It was clear I wasn't expected or maybe even wanted. I'm good, I lied. I'll just go change out of these work clothes. As I left the kitchen, I heard their voices drop to a whisper. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. But the evidence was everywhere, the perfume, the new dress, the candles, the careful arrangement of food and wine. All the little details screamed special, but none of them were for me. I tried to distract myself, but my mind wouldn't let it go. The questions started piling up. How long had this been going on? Why Peter? Was I really so oblivious that I hadn't seen the signs? And why was it that, of all the people in our lives, she'd chosen him to share this moment with? Downstairs, their laughter floated up through the floorboards, muffled but unmistakably in asterisk mate. I thought about the way Savannah used to light candles for us, the meals she used to make just because she felt like it. I remembered the first time she'd worn that perfume, how she'd dabbed it behind her ears and asked me what I thought. "You smell like a dream," I told her, and she'd blushed, pulling me close. Now, it felt like I was living in someone else's story. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back downstairs, trying to look casual. They were finishing up, laughing at some private joke. Savannah's hand brushed Peter's as she reached for her glass, and he didn't move away. I felt invisible. "I'm heading out for a walk," I announced, grabbing my keys. Savannah barely looked up. "Okay, babe," she said, her voice full of forced sweetness. "Don't be long." As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, the reality hit me: something was broken. Maybe it had been for a while, and I was just now noticing the cracks. I walked for an hour, circling the block, replaying the scene in my mind. The longer I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit, 1,000 little oddities that suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. When I finally came home, the kitchen was spotless, the candles snuffed out, the wine glasses washed and put away. Savannah was upstairs, already in bed, her back turned to me. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sound of her breathing, wondering when our ordinary life had become a nightmare hidden in plain sight. That night, for the first time in years, I slept with one eye open. You ever have that feeling after something shakes you, where every memory suddenly takes on a different color? Like someone's gone back and edited the footage of your life, and now you can't help but rewatch everything with suspicion. That's what the next few days felt like for me, rewinding, overanalyzing, digging through moments I'd brushed off before. I couldn't get the image of Savannah and Peter out of my head. The way she dressed up, the careful little details of the dinner, the split second of panic in her eyes when she saw me. It was all so obvious now that I thought about it. And once I started looking backward, the red flags just kept piling up. For months, Savannah had been acting different. It started small. She'd beg and leaving the house more often, claiming she had business meetings or last-minute projects that just couldn't wait. She'd never been much of a workaholic before, but suddenly she was gone too, sometimes 3 nights a week. At first, I bought her excuses without a second thought. She said the company was growing, her boss was pushing everyone harder. I wanted to believe her. Why wouldn't I? Then there were the new clothes. Dresses, shoes, little accessories I'd never seen before. Sometimes they still had the tags on, tucked away in the back of the closet. When I asked about them, she'd just shrug and say she caught a sale or that she needed to freshen things up for work. It made sense, sort of, but it didn't explain why she'd never worn any of it for me. I started noticing other things too. She was constantly on her phone, texting, always texting, sometimes with this little smile she tried to hide. She'd turn away when I walked into the room or claim she was just talking to a friend. Sometimes she'd step out onto the balcony even in the cold, claiming she needed to call her sister so she wouldn't disturb me. More and more, her phone felt like a barrier between us, something I wasn't supposed to touch or ask about. The emotional distance was harder to pin down, but it was there, growing wider every week. Savannah used to be warm, always ready with a joke or a story about her day. Lately, she'd grown cold, almost snappish. I'd try to start a conversation and she'd deflect, or worse, get irritated at the smallest thing. If I pressed her, she'd accuse me of being controlling, or too sensitive, or just not understanding how stressed she was. Looking back, I realized she'd been slowly pushing me out. At first, it was just little things. She stopped asking me to join her for TV at night, or made dinner only for herself, claiming she'd eaten earlier. Then she started making plans without telling me at all, showing up late or not at all, acting like it was no big deal. I kept telling myself it was a phase, that maybe we were both just busy, that things would get better if I gave her space. But in reality, I was just afraid to face the truth. I was losing her, and I didn't know why. That weekend, I tried to act normal. I asked her if she wanted to go out for breakfast the way we used to. She stared at her phone the whole time, barely touching her food. When I suggested we see a movie, she claimed she had a headache and went to take a nap, leaving me alone in the living room with the TV playing to no one. Sunday afternoon, I caught her on the balcony again, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. When she saw me watching through the window, she spun around and ********* me a glare. "Can I have a little privacy?" she snapped, as if I was the one being unreasonable. I spent a lot of time in my car that weekend, just driving aimlessly around the neighborhood, listening to talk radio because music felt too heavy. I called my brother, tried to talk about anything but what was happening at home. I didn't mention Savannah or Peter or any of it. I just didn't want to admit it out loud, not yet. But the worst part wasn't the suspicion or the loneliness. It was the self-doubt. Was I being paranoid? Was I imagining things because I'd read one too many stories about infidelity online? Was I just boring, washed up, not enough for her anymore? The questions gnawed at me day and night. Every time Savannah came home late, I found myself watching her closely, her makeup, her hair, the scent of her perfume, even the way she moved. I tried to catch her in a lie, but she was always just out of reach, her explanations just plausible enough to make me doubt myself. At night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling, listening to her soft breathing. I wondered if she was really asleep or just pretending. I wondered if she was dreaming about someone else. Sometimes she'd roll over, away from me, pulling the covers tight around her shoulders. I missed the way she used to curl up against me, the way we used to fit together without thinking. More and more, I felt like a ghost in my own house. I tiptoed around her moods, trying not to make things worse, but nothing I did seemed to help. If I asked questions, she got defensive. If I gave her space, she drifted farther away. The memory of that dinner with Peter haunted me. I replayed it over and over, searching for some sign that I was wrong, some reassurance that this was all just a misunderstanding. But all I found were more questions and a gnawing certainty that the life I thought I had was slipping away, one silent night at a time. It was 3 days after that dinner with Peter when the bottom finally dropped out. The truth didn't come all at once like an explosion. It was quieter, more insidious, the kind of slow-burn revelation that leaves you wondering why you didn't see it sooner. It happened on a Tuesday night, after Savannah had once again disappeared for what she said was a late strategy session with her boss. I tried not to care. I tried to act normal, reheating leftovers for one and watching an old baseball game I wasn't even interested in. But there was this itch in the back of my mind, a voice I couldn't quiet that kept replaying every excuse Savannah had fed me over the past few months. When she finally came home, it was nearly midnight. I heard the front door click shut, her soft footsteps in the hall. I watched her in the glow of the kitchen light as she took off her shoes, moving with that same tired, distracted air. She gave me a quick, guilty smile and mumbled, "Long day." I'm beat, before heading straight upstairs. I sat there for a minute wrestling with myself, then followed her up. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw her sitting on the edge of her bed, phone in her lap, lost in whatever she was reading. Her fingers were flying across the screen, thumbs tapping out messages with a speed and comfort that made me ache. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She jumped slightly, clutching the phone as if I'd caught her with something illegal. "Yeah. Why wouldn't it be?" she said, not meeting my eyes. I shrugged, leaning against the doorway. "Just asking." We both knew it was a lie, but neither of us said anything else. I changed clothes and headed to the bathroom. When I came back, Savannah was already under the covers, facing the wall. Her phone was gone from sight. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there in the dark, counting the seconds between her breaths, thinking about the laughter I'd overheard with Peter, the new dresses, the way she'd started guarding her phone like it was the only thing in her life worth protecting. Eventually, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs, telling myself I just needed some water, some air, anything to quiet my racing thoughts. That's when it happened. I passed by her purse, sitting on the hall table, and saw her phone sticking out just enough that the screen lit up. A message preview popped up. "I miss you too. Can't wait for Friday. Peter." My heart thudded so loud I was sure I'd wake the whole neighborhood. My hands shook as I picked up her phone, my brain screaming that I shouldn't do this, that I should respect her privacy, but I couldn't stop myself. My fingers were ice as I unlocked the phone. She'd never changed the code from my birthday. The messages were all there, right in front of me. Savannah and Peter, chatting for months, their texts full of inside jokes, late-night confessions, even photos from hotels and little **TS of their meals together. There were plans for trips, for nights out, for stolen afternoons I'd never known about. They even talked about finding a place together, discussing paint colors, furniture, new beginnings. And there it was, the worst part. One message from Savannah, just days earlier. "He has no idea. I'll tell him soon. I want to be with you. I'm done living a lie." I dropped the phone, feeling sick. Everything inside me twisted up at once. Anger, sadness, relief that I finally knew the truth, and this overwhelming sense of humiliation. My marriage, my home, all of it was just a stage for Savannah's secret life. She found me in the hallway a minute later, eyes wide and terrified. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, How long? Her lips trembled, and she sank to the floor. Lucas, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. That's not an answer, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She wiped at her tears, her whole body shaking. It's been a few months. It started out as nothing, just someone to talk to. But it got serious. I didn't mean for it to happen. I tried to end it. But you didn't. I finished for her. She shook her head. I didn't. I couldn't. We sat there in silence, the air between us thick with everything that had gone unsaid for too long. Eventually, she admitted everything. The nights she'd lied about work, the gifts and dinners, the weekend workshops that were actually nights away with Peter. And then, the final blow. She told me she didn't want to live with me anymore. She was leaving. She'd already started making plans to move in with Peter, to start over in a new apartment. That might have been enough to crush me. But there was one last detail that pushed it over the edge. The apartment they'd picked out together? It was registered in my name, paid for with my money, from our joint account under the guise of investment property paperwork she'd asked me to sign months ago, back when I still trusted her with everything. All I could do was laugh. It was a bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Savannah reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Don't, I said. Don't make this about how sorry you are. You made your choice. Now you can live with it. She tried to apologize, to explain herself, to say she never meant for things to get this far. But I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could think was how easy it was to lose everything, how quickly love could turn into something unrecognizable. That night, after she went to bed, alone this time, I sat on the back porch until the sun came up, just staring at the sky and wondering where I'd go from here, now that everything I thought I knew was gone. I don't know how long I sat out there on the porch after she went to bed. Hours, probably. The night stretched on in this strange, endless way, the world around me silent except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Somewhere between the darkness and the slow creep of dawn, a new feeling started to take root inside me. Something sharper than grief, colder than sadness. Resolve. Savannah had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. I wasn't going to sit around and let them walk away with everything I'd built. Not without a fight. At first, I didn't even know where to start. My whole life had revolved around her. The mortgage, the finances, even my future plans, all of it had Savannah's fingerprints on it. But now that I knew about the apartment, the one she and Peter were planning to move into using my name and my money, I realized I had leverage if I was smart enough to use it. I grabbed my laptop and started digging through old emails, contracts, anything I could find about the so-called investment property. It didn't take long to piece it together. Savannah had slipped the paperwork past me months ago, buried under a stack of refinancing documents and household bills she helped manage. She even forged my signature on a few things, poorly too, like she never thought I'd actually look. My stomach twisted in disgust. How long had she been planning this? Still, anger wasn't going to solve this. I needed action. First thing that morning, I made a call to the real estate company listed on the lease. I explained the situation carefully, calmly, like I was reporting a suspicious transaction to the bank. The woman on the other end, a no-nonsense type named Marcy, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she cleared her throat. Mr. Harper, she said, if what you're saying is true, this could be considered fraud. Especially if the property is in your name without your full consent. You may want to consider contacting your lawyer. I had to smile just a little. I'm already ahead of you. With her help, I formally froze any further activity involving the apartment. No move-ins, no lease transfers, no renovations, nothing could proceed without my direct authorization. I also filed a fraud report against Peter and Savannah with the management company just to cover my bases. By noon, it was like someone had slammed a brick wall in front of their bright, shiny new future. I didn't tell Savannah right away. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in first. And it didn't take long. That afternoon, I overheard her whispering furiously on the phone in the guest bedroom. The door cracked just enough for her frantic words to spill out. They're saying the lease is frozen. I don't know what happened, Peter. They're talking about fraud. A pause. Then, no, I didn't think he'd ever check. He never checks anything. Another pause. Just stay calm, okay? I'll fix it. I almost laughed out loud at that. Fix it? Good luck, sweetheart. That night, Savannah cornered me in the kitchen while I was fixing a sandwich. She was pale, her eyes wide and desperate. "Lucas," she said, forcing a shaky smile, "can we talk?" I shrugged. "Sure. What's on your mind?" She looked stunned for a second, like she couldn't believe how calm I was being. She launched into this long, rambling apology about how things got complicated and how she made mistakes but still cared about me and wanted us to part peacefully. I just leaned against the counter, letting her spin her little story. When she finally ran out of words, I set my plate down and looked her square in the eye. "You're not moving into that apartment," I said flatly. "Not now. Not ever." She blinked. What are you talking about?" "I know everything, Savannah," I said, my voice sharp now. "The fake paperwork. The lease. The account withdrawals. All of it. You used me. And now you and Peter get nothing." For a moment, she just stood there, stunned. Then the mask slipped. Her face twisted into something ugly, something I barely recognized. "You're doing this to punish me," she spat. "You're vindictive. You're trying to ruin my life." I laughed, but there wasn't a shred of humor in it. "You already ruined it, Savannah. I'm just making sure you don't profit from it." She stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. Upstairs, I heard her shouting into her phone again, her voice cracking with rage. I didn't bother listening this time. I'd done what I needed to do. The fallout came fast. By the end of the week, Peter showed up at the house, pounding on the front door like a lunatic. I didn't answer. I watched through the peephole as he ranted and raved, blaming me for ruining everything, calling me every name he could think of. He even threatened to sue me, which was hilarious considering he was the one staring down a possible fraud investigation. I recorded every word on my phone, just in case. Eventually, he gave up and stormed off. Savannah, meanwhile, disappeared into damage control mode, calling banks, real estate agents, anyone she could think of to salvage what was left of their plans. But it was too late. They weren't just exposed, they were toxic. Their new life together had crumbled before it even began, and I hadn't had to raise my voice once. For the first time in a long time, I slept through the night. I thought after blowing up their little scheme, things would finally start to quiet down. Maybe it was naive of me to think that people like Savannah and Peter would just accept defeat and disappear. I should have known better. At first, it was little things. Annoying, petty stuff. Someone knocked over my trash cans in the middle of the night. I'd find muddy footprints across my porch that didn't match my own. Packages I never ordered started showing up, junk, mostly. A pizza delivery at 2 a.m. even though I hadn't called anyone. I chalked it up to coincidence at first. Bad luck. I told myself maybe some neighbor kids were messing around. But deep down, I already knew who was behind it. It didn't stop there. One morning, I walked out to find my mailbox ripped halfway off its post, dangling like a broken arm. There were spray-painted words scrawled across the sidewalk in front of my house, "Liar," in big red letters. I stood there, staring at it for a long time. Not angry. Not scared. Just tired. That's when the text started. Blocked numbers. Weird burner phones. At first, they were random insults: coward, traitor, thief. Then they got more personal. "You think you won. You haven't seen anything yet. Better watch your back. Payback's coming. You'll regret what you did." The kind of messages designed to make you flinch every time your phone buzzes. I tried to ignore them. I really did. But after a while, it started getting under my skin. I'd find myself glancing over my shoulder at the grocery store, pausing before unlocking my front door, sleeping with one ear open again, just like those first awful nights after Savannah's betrayal. I kept telling myself it was all bark, no bite. Peter didn't have the guts to actually do anything serious. Savannah was probably too busy trying to pick up the pieces of her wrecked life. But then one night, I came home from work and found my front door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But someone had been inside. I could feel it, the wrongness of it hanging heavy in the air. I checked every room, every closet, heart pounding so hard it made my ears ring. Nothing missing. No obvious damage. Just subtle things. A picture frame tilted on the mantel. The scent of cheap cologne lingering in the hallway. The faint feeling of being watched. I didn't even hesitate. I called the police. An officer came out, did a sweep, took my statement. "Doesn't look like forced entry," he said, shrugging. "Could have been a mistake. Maybe the door didn't latch all the way." I nodded, knowing full well it wasn't a mistake. I thanked him and locked up tight behind him, deadbolts and all. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps. Every passing car threw long, threatening shadows across the walls. I kept my phone next to me on the nightstand, screen facing up, waiting for it to light up again. It did. 2:17 a.m. Another text. Bet you don't feel so safe now. No name. No number. No mercy. That was the final straw. I spent the next morning gathering everything I could, screensh *TS of the messages, recordings of Peter's rant at my front door, photos of the vandalism. I printed it all out, kept copies on a flash drive, and made a backup folder on my laptop. If they were trying to scare me, they needed to understand that I wasn't playing games anymore. I reached out to a lawyer, the same one who'd helped me block the apartment lease. He listened patiently as I explained what had been happening, flipping through the evidence with a frown deepening on his face. You have enough here to press harassment charges, he said. At the very least, we can file a restraining order. The words restraining order sounded so heavy, so official. It wasn't how I wanted this to end. But they'd forced my hand. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. It could escalate things before it settles them. I thought about it for a long moment. About the nights of lying awake, listening for intruders. About the messages, the threats, the way my own home had started to feel like enemy territory. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. Savannah didn't come to the hearing. Peter did. He sat across from me in the small courtroom, glaring like he could set me on fire just by looking. He didn't say a word. Just stared, jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack his teeth. The judge wasn't impressed. With the evidence laid out plain and simple, it wasn't even a close call. The restraining order was granted immediately. Peter was officially barred from coming anywhere near me, my home, or my work. One violation and he'd be facing jail time. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The nightmare wasn't over yet, not completely, but the tide was turning. For the first time since this whole thing had started, I felt like I could breathe again without looking over my shoulder. But I also knew better than to think it would be that easy. People like Peter didn't take losing well. Savannah either. There would be fallout. There always is. Still, as I sat behind the wheel of my car, watching the courthouse shrink in my rearview mirror, a small, stubborn hope lit up inside me. Maybe this wasn't just survival. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. The restraining order worked better than I expected. Peter slithered out of sight almost immediately. No more threatening messages. No more footsteps outside my door. The silence he left behind was eerie at first, but I welcomed it like a man welcomes clean air after drowning. Savannah, for her part, didn't even try to reach out. After everything, I figured she was too busy salvaging whatever she could from her wreckage of a life. I didn't hate her exactly. I didn't even care enough to hate. I just wanted her gone, and she was. With no ties left anchoring me, I made some decisions fast. First, I sold the house. Too many memories in those walls. Good ones, bad ones, it didn't matter. They all felt heavy now, soaked into the floorboards, hanging in the air like ghosts. When the realtor handed me the first offer, I didn't hesitate. I signed, packed my things, and left without looking back. I moved across town into a small apartment overlooking a park. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every square foot clean of betrayal and old pain. I changed jobs too. Left behind the firm where Peter and Savannah's names still floated around in gossip. I found a new company, a fresh start. People who knew nothing about the man I used to be. In the early mornings, I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee and just breathe. No drama, no lies, just me and the quiet. And little by little, the weight started lifting. Starting over wasn't a straight line. Some days were harder than others. I'd catch myself thinking about Savannah. Not missing her, exactly, but remembering the life we had and wondering how it all unraveled so quietly. How two people could sleep side by side, share coffee, share holidays, and still end up as strangers. The truth is, sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes loyalty isn't enough. Sometimes you can give someone every piece of your heart, and they'll still look for something they think is missing, something they can't even name. And that's not on you. I learned that the hard way. What mattered now was that I had myself, my dignity, my peace. And those things, they were priceless. Months later, on a warm Saturday morning, I found myself walking through the park near my apartment. Families laughed. Joggers passed by with dogs pulling at their leashes. Kids played soccer in the open fields. Life went on bright, chaotic, beautiful. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't bitter about it. I wasn't angry or sad or lost. I was just there, present. I sat down on a bench under a tree, closed my eyes, and let the sunlight warm my face. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe one day I'd meet someone new. Maybe not. Right now, it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't chasing someone who didn't want to be caught. I was enough exactly as I was. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not winning against Savannah. Not getting revenge on Peter. But finding myself again. And finally, feeling free.